The night air was crisp, a quiet contrast to the chaos that was about to unfold. The nurse stepped out of the hospital, exhausted but relieved that her shift was over. It had been a brutal 14-hour stretch, short-staffed, patients in critical condition, and barely a moment to catch her breath. She pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders and walked across the nearly empty parking lot, eager to get home. But as she neared her car, a sinking feeling settled in her gut. Something was wrong. Laughter echoed through the lot, rough and mocking. She turned the corner and froze. 6 bikers stood around her car, their leather jackets reflecting the dim glow of the streetlights. The biggest one, a bearded man with a tattoo-covered arm, leaned against her driver's side door, smirking. "Well, well. Look what we got here," he drawled, tapping the side mirror with a knife. The others chuckled, surrounding the car like a pack of wolves. One of them kicked the front bumper, making the entire vehicle shake. Her heart pounded. She wasn't sure what to say, what to do. These weren't just random troublemakers. Their jackets bore a name she recognized from the news, a notorious biker gang that had been causing havoc in nearby towns. Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to keep her voice steady. "That's my car. Please, just let me leave." The leader laughed. "Oh, is that so? You see, sweetheart, you parked in our spot." She glanced around. The lot was almost empty. There was no way this was their spot. "I didn't see any signs," she said carefully. Another biker, a wiry man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. "You don't need signs when we own the place." The leader tapped his knife against his palm. "Now, how should we handle this, boys?" Before she could react, the first strike came. A heavy boot slammed against the side of the car, shattering the side mirror. Glass scattered across the pavement. She gasped, her breath catching in her throat. Another biker pulled a chain from his belt and whipped it across the hood, leaving a deep scratch in the paint. "Stop," she cried. "Please, just stop." They ignored her. The windshield cracked next, a fist-sized rock hurled through it. Tires deflated with a sickening hiss as one of them drove a knife into the rubber, grinning as he twisted the blade. Tears burned in her eyes. This wasn't just a car. It was her only way to work, her only way to survive. The leader stepped forward, towering over her. He leaned in close, his breath reeking of alcohol and smoke. "Next time, don't park where you don't belong." And just like that, they walked away, their laughter fading into the night as their bikes roared to life. She stood there, frozen, staring at the wreckage of her car. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. She only dialed one number. Her brother. Because if anyone knew how to handle men like them, it was him. She sat on the curb, her breath shaky, her fingers gripping the phone so tightly it hurt. The hospital parking lot felt emptier than ever, the distant hum of traffic doing little to drown out the ringing in her ears. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Hey, you okay?" For the first time that night, she let out a shuddering breath. "No. I need you." There was a pause. She could hear the tension in his silence. "Where are you?" "Hospital parking lot." "My car, it's destroyed." "A gang of bikers." That was all she had to say. "Stay there. I'm on my way." She didn't have to explain. He never needed the details to know when something was wrong. 20 minutes later, headlights cut through the darkness. A sleek black truck rolled into the lot, coming to a slow, controlled stop near her wrecked car. The driver's door opened, and he stepped out. Her brother had always carried himself a certain way. Even in a t-shirt and jeans, there was a sharpness to him, a controlled presence, the kind that made people think twice before messing with him. His movements were precise. No wasted energy, no hesitation. A soldier through and through. She felt a wave of relief just seeing him. He took in the scene with a single glance, the slashed tires, the shattered windshield, the deep gouge across the hood. Then, without a word, he crouched beside the car, running his fingers over the damage. How many of them? 6. Maybe more. Any weapons? Knives. Chains. They didn't care about getting caught, they acted like they owned the place. His jaw tightened. Something shifted in his expression, calm, but calculating. They want to intimidate people. They need fear to stay in control. He straightened, his eyes scanning the area. He wasn't just looking at the car, he was mapping out the entire space. The positioning of the security cameras, the tire marks left behind by the bikes, the general layout of the lot. His military instincts were kicking in. They left too easily, he muttered. Which means they think they can do it again. Her stomach twisted. What do you mean? He glanced at her. They didn't take your wallet. Your phone. They weren't after money. They wanted to send a message. Which means they expect you to be scared. They expect you to stay quiet. Her fingers curled into fists. She hated the thought of them laughing about this, thinking they had won. Her brother studied her reaction, then gave a small nod. Good. Hold on to that feeling. She looked at him, confused. What do you mean? He turned back toward his truck and opened the door. Get in. We're going to find them. Her eyes widened. Wait, now. The longer we wait, the more comfortable they get. They think they own this town. He met her gaze, his voice steady. They don't. She hesitated only a moment before climbing into the truck. As they pulled onto the road, she glanced at him. You were gone for a long time. Where have you been? He kept his eyes on the road. Working. She frowned. Doing what? A ghost of a smirk crossed his lips. Let's just say. I've dealt with worse than a few bikers. She wasn't sure what that meant. And right now, she wasn't sure she wanted to know. All she knew was that the bikers had no idea what was coming. The truck moved through the city streets like a predator in the night. Her brother drove with a quiet intensity, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes scanning every intersection, every alley. He wasn't just looking, he was hunting. She sat beside him, gripping the seatbelt, her mind still trying to catch up with what was happening. You really think we'll find them? She asked, breaking the silence. They're not hiding, he said simply. Guys like that? They need to be seen. Need to show off. They don't just disappear, they go somewhere they can celebrate. She shivered. The thought of them laughing over what they did to her car made her blood boil. Where would they go? He tapped his fingers against the wheel, thinking. Somewhere they feel untouchable. A bar. A hangout. A place where no one questions them. She hesitated. I think I heard one of them mention something before they left. A name. Ricky's. His expression darkened. I know the place. 20 minutes later, they pulled up outside an old bar on the outskirts of town. The neon sign flickered, barely holding on to life. Motorcycles lined the parking lot, their chrome details reflecting the streetlights. Her brother killed the engine, but neither of them moved. She swallowed. What now? Now I see what we're dealing with. Before she could protest, he stepped out of the truck. He didn't storm in, didn't make a scene, he just walked. But even that was enough to turn heads. The front of the bar had a group of bikers smoking and drinking. The moment they saw him, their conversation stopped. They weren't used to outsiders, especially ones who walked like they had nothing to fear. Her brother ignored them, his eyes scanning the entrance, the windows, the layout of the place. Then, Just as smoothly as he arrived, he turned and walked back to the truck. She stared at him as he climbed back in. "That's it?" she asked. "That's it. Did you see them?" He nodded. "They're inside. All 6 of them." A chill ran down her spine. She had no idea how he did that, how he could walk into an unknown place, take everything in, and leave as if he had all the answers. She took a shaky breath. "So, what now? Call the cops?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled out his phone, typing something quickly. "Cops won't do anything," he said finally. "Even if they show up, these guys will be back on the street by morning." "That's not enough." Her pulse quickened. "Then what's the plan?" He smirked. But there was no humor in it. "They like to intimidate people. Make them feel powerless." He slipped the phone back into his pocket. "Let's see how they feel when the tables turn." She wasn't sure what he meant. But something told her that by the time the night was over, the bikers would never forget his name. The truck rolled away from the bar, disappearing into the night. But they weren't leaving. Her brother had a plan. She could feel it, the shift in his demeanor, the way his jaw clenched just slightly as he drove. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about control. He was already 5 steps ahead, thinking like a soldier. "You're being really quiet," she said, glancing at him. "What are you planning?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a sharp turn down an alley and parked in the shadows. Then he pulled out his phone. "I sent a message to some people I trust," he finally said. "I need a few things delivered. Won't take long." She frowned. "What kind of things?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Let's just say, I'm setting the stage." 30 minutes later, a black van pulled up beside them. 2 men stepped out, big, no-nonsense guys with the same quiet intensity as her brother. They didn't ask questions. They just handed over a duffel bag and nodded. Her brother took it, unzipped it slightly, and checked the contents. Whatever he saw in there was exactly what he wanted. Then, just as quickly as they arrived, the men got back in their van and disappeared into the night. She swallowed hard. "What's in the bag?" He gave her a sideways glance. "Tools." Her stomach twisted. She wasn't sure she wanted to know what that meant. "We should call the cops," she tried again. He zipped the bag shut. "This isn't about the cops. This is about making sure they never do this again." There was something final in his voice. She took a deep breath. "And how exactly do we do that?" His smirk returned, slow and confident. "We hit them where it hurts." Back at the bar, the bikers were still drinking, laughing, unaware that their night was about to change. Her brother moved like a shadow, positioning himself just outside of the bar's security cameras, just beyond the glow of the flickering neon sign. He crouched near their row of motorcycles, opening the duffel bag. Inside, heavy-duty zip ties. A small handheld jammer, to kill their phone signals. A roll of thick industrial-strength duct tape. A handful of metal ball bearings. And most importantly, a few well-placed surprises. "You're really doing this," she whispered, standing nearby, nervously glancing at the bar door. "You don't win against guys like this by fighting them head-on," he murmured back. "You make them feel helpless. Just like they tried to do to you." Her heart pounded. She wasn't a fighter. She wasn't built for confrontation. But watching him work, she understood something. He wasn't just avenging her car. He was making a statement. One the bikers wouldn't forget. The first part of the trap was simple. Ball bearings scattered under the motorcycle's kickstands. The moment the bikers tried to take off, their bikes would tip over like dominoes. Phone jammer activated. No calls. No texts. No way to call for backup. A final, well-placed trigger. All set within minutes. "Let's go," he said, grabbing her wrist and pulling her away. She didn't argue. Because the moment they got back to the truck, she saw the first biker stumble outside. And when he tried to start his bike, the chaos began. The first biker stepped outside, stretching his arms as if he owned the world. The night air was crisp, filled with the distant hum of the city. Then, his boot crunched over something small and metallic. He frowned, looking down. At first, he didn't understand. The gravel lot outside the bar had been smooth when they arrived. But now, tiny metal balls glistened under the streetlight, scattered like marbles. He didn't think much of it. Not until he swung a leg over his bike and tried to kick the stand up. The bike wobbled. His balance shifted. The moment he put his full weight on the bike, the front wheel slipped, and the entire machine came crashing down with a thunderous clang. "What the?" A second biker heard the commotion and ran outside. Then another. And another. Within moments, all six were in the parking lot, their drunken laughter replaced by pure confusion. For bikes were already on their sides, and as the remaining bikers rushed to help, the rest tipped over like dominoes. Gasoline leaked. Metal scraped asphalt. "Who messed with our bikes?" one of them bellowed, rage building in his voice. But then, they tried to pull out their phones. And nothing worked. No calls. No texts. No signal. That's when the first sliver of fear crept in. Across the street, inside their truck, she watched it all unfold. Her brother sat beside her, perfectly still, his gaze locked on the scene. "They're confused," she whispered. "Good," he murmured back. "That's the point." She looked at him. "What happens now?" He exhaled slowly. "Now, we make them feel what you felt." Back in the lot, the bikers were furious. One of them, big, bald, and covered in tattoos, growled in frustration. He grabbed a crowbar from the back of his fallen bike and turned in a slow circle, scanning the darkness. "Whoever did this is still here," he muttered. The others tensed. "Check around the bar," another one said. "Maybe some punks are messing with us." They didn't know they were being watched. Didn't know that a trained soldier was already in position, controlling every step of their night. And then, the final trigger. A loud metallic bang echoed from behind the bar, a deliberate noise, planted just far enough to draw them away from their bikes. "Back there," one of them yelled. All six of them took the bait. Like sharks scenting blood, they stormed toward the noise, weapons drawn. But they didn't realize they were stepping into the next part of the trap. Her brother smirked. "Showtime." The bikers stormed toward the back of the bar, boots crunching against the pavement, fists clenched around whatever weapons they had grabbed, a crowbar, a length of chain, even a broken beer bottle. They were angry. They had no idea they were also being played. She held her breath inside the truck. "They're taking the bait," she whispered. Her brother didn't move, his focus locked on the alley. This wasn't luck. It was precision. "Just wait," he murmured. "They'll realize soon enough." Behind the bar, the alley was dimly lit, filled with deep shadows. One of the bikers, the leader, judging by how the others followed him, stepped forward cautiously. "Whoever's out here, you've got about 3 seconds to show yourself before I..." Crash. Something toppled in the darkness. A dumpster? A metal pipe? They couldn't tell. But it was enough to put them on edge. "Fan out," the leader growled. They moved deeper into the alley, spreading out just enough. And that was the mistake. Her brother was already moving. Silent. Calculated. Like a predator. The first biker to break formation never saw it coming. A shadow moved behind him, an arm locked around his neck, cutting off his voice before he could shout. A second later, he was dragged into the darkness. No noise. No warning. And then there were 5. "Where'd he go?" one of the bikers muttered. The others paused, scanning the alley. Something felt wrong. They had come in as the hunters, ready to dish out pain. But now, they were the ones being stalked. Then the second one vanished. A blur of movement. A quick thud. The rest of them spun around, weapons raised. What the hell is happening? Panic seeped into their voices. One of them grabbed his phone again. Still no signal. They were trapped. She watched from the truck, her pulse racing. Her brother had trained for this. Disarming. Subduing. Taking control without a single wasted move. And now, these bikers, who thought they were untouchable, were learning a lesson they'd never forget. "He's cutting them down one by one," she whispered. Her brother's voice was steady. "That's how you take out a pack of wolves." Her fingers curled into fists. For the first time since this all began, she felt something new. Not fear. Not anger. Power. Back in the alley, only 3 bikers remained. The leader's eyes darted around. "We need to get out of here," one of them whispered. But before they could run, a figure emerged from the shadows. Her brother. Calm. Unshaken. Blocking their only exit. "Going somewhere?" he asked. His voice was almost casual. But the bikers knew. This wasn't a man they could intimidate. This was a man they should have never messed with. The tension in the air was thick, palpable, like the calm before a storm. The brothers' plan had been set into motion. He had waited, calculated every move with the precision of a soldier. He knew that he couldn't afford any mistakes. Everything he had learned in the military, every skill, every strategy, had led to this very moment. He was not just seeking revenge. He was trying to restore his sense of control, to reclaim the peace that had been shattered the moment the bikers destroyed his sister's car. The brother stood in the shadows, observing the bikers as they gathered at their usual meeting spot, an abandoned warehouse at the outskirts of town. He had followed their patterns for weeks now, carefully noting when and where they would show up. Tonight, it was finally time. He could hear their laughter echoing through the empty streets, their bikes roaring as they arrived one by one. The familiar sound of their engines filled the air, each rev a reminder of the destruction they had caused. His pulse quickened as his fingers tightened around the weapon he had brought with him, a tool of precision, just like the ones he had used in his military service. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was a personal matter. His sister's life had been wrecked in an instant, and now, he was going to make them pay. The brother's hand shook slightly as he checked his equipment, but his resolve remained unshaken. He had trained for situations like this. He had fought for his country, and now he was fighting for his family. As the bikers continued their raucous celebration, the brother moved silently into position. He was invisible in the shadows, his every step calculated to make sure he was undetected. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of gasoline and the sound of clinking chains. The bikers were too busy boasting and laughing to notice the silent figure watching from afar. The brothers' plan was simple: take down the leader first. The others would follow. He had studied the bikers, and he knew their hierarchy. The leader was the most dangerous, the one who would resist the hardest. But if he could take him down quickly, the others would crumble. They were nothing without their leader. With a deep breath, the brother crept closer to the entrance of the warehouse, where the leader was holding court, his back turned to the others. The brother's eyes locked on him, every muscle in his body tense, ready to strike. Suddenly, a voice rang out, loud and taunting. "You really think you can take us all down, soldier? It was the leader, his voice dripping with arrogance. He had known something was off. The brother had underestimated how quickly they would catch on. The element of surprise was gone. Without a moment's hesitation, the brother lunged forward, his military training kicking in. He was swift, moving with precision, tackling the leader to the ground before the biker had a chance to react. The others began to scatter, shouting, but they were too slow. The brother was already on top of the leader, pinning him down, his eyes locked on the man's face. "You've messed with the wrong person," the brother growled, his voice low and menacing. The leader struggled beneath him, but the brother's grip was unyielding. His strength, honed from years of training, was overwhelming. As the brother subdued the leader, he could feel the eyes of the other bikers on him, waiting for their moment to strike. But he was ready. He had expected them to act. His plan had always accounted for this. Before any of them could react, he pulled out a device from his pocket, a small, powerful taser. He pressed it to the leader's chest, and in an instant, the man's body stiffened, a jolt of electricity coursing through him. The other bikers hesitated, unsure of what to do. The brother stood tall, the leader now incapacitated at his feet. His eyes scanned the rest of the gang, and in that moment, they all understood the same thing. This was not a fight they could win. They had underestimated him, just as he had once underestimated them. "Get out of here," the brother ordered, his voice steady and calm, despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. The bikers, now realizing the true extent of his preparation, began to back away slowly, not daring to challenge him. One by one, they left, their bikes roaring to life in a hurried escape. The brother stood there, his breath steady, but his heart racing. He had done it. He had taken down the bikers without firing a shot. His training had proven more than enough. But there was something in the air, something he couldn't shake off. It wasn't over yet. As the last of the bikers sped off into the night, the brother looked down at the leader, who was now lying on the ground, immobilized. The man was groaning, barely conscious, but still alive. The brother's mind raced. He could have ended it all right here, but something held him back. He wasn't a killer. He stood up and, with one last look at the broken gang member, turned and walked away. His sister was safe. For now, that was enough. But deep down, the brother knew this wasn't the end of the story. There would be more battles to fight. More choices to make. The final showdown had been won, but the consequences were only just beginning. The night had been long and intense, but as the brother walked away from the wreckage, his heart didn't feel like a soldier's victory. It felt heavier than it ever had. The weight of what had just happened, of everything he had just done, was settling deep inside him, and no matter how many times he tried to shake it off, it lingered. His sister was safe now, that was the good part. He had made sure of that. But at what cost? The biker gang had been dealt with, but in the heat of his action, the brother couldn't help but wonder if there was something more he could have done. Had he gone too far? Had he become what he despised? It was a question that gnawed at him, refusing to let him rest. He didn't know where to go from here. The adrenaline rush was wearing off, and in its place, the quiet reflection began to take over. His mind raced back to the moment when the first biker had crashed into his sister's car. That single act of violence had shattered everything he thought he knew about right and wrong. Now, standing in the aftermath, he wondered if he had truly made things right, or if he had simply added to the chaos. As he reached his sister's house, the thought of what he'd done made him hesitate. Was it even fair to tell her what had happened? Could she understand the decision he'd made, the path he'd walked down? Or would she see him as just another man lost to violence and revenge? He opened the door slowly, stepping inside. The lights were dim, casting long shadows across the room. He found her sitting in the living room, waiting for him, the worry on her face making his chest tighten. She had been waiting for him to return, her mind racing with concern. She hadn't known how it would end, hadn't known if he would come back at all. But now, as he stood there, looking at her, he realized just how much his actions had affected everything. His sister was safe, but was she really? Had he protected her only to put them both in danger in a different way? She stood as soon as she saw him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of the man she knew. But what she saw was different. His face was drawn, tired, the lines of his military past clear in his posture. She walked over to him, her arms outstretched, and he didn't hesitate this time. He wrapped his arms around her tightly, pulling her close. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "For what?" she asked, pulling back slightly to look at him. "You did what you had to do." The brother shook his head, his eyes dark with the weight of everything he had just been through. "Did I, though? Did I really?" His words hung in the air between them, heavy with doubt. "I had to stop them, but at what cost?" Her expression softened, and she placed a hand on his cheek. "Sometimes," she said gently, "we have to make hard choices. Choices that hurt us, even when we know they're the right ones. What you did wasn't easy, but you did it for me, for us. And I'll never be able to thank you enough." Her words should have comforted him, but instead, they only deepened his internal conflict. He had done what he thought was right, what any soldier would do. But was it enough? Would it ever be enough? The brother stepped away, pacing the room. "I don't know, sis. I don't know if I can live with what I've done. I've fought for my country, and I thought that meant something. But now, after everything, I'm just lost." She walked over to him, taking his hand in hers. "You're not lost," she said, her voice strong. "You're human. And that means you're allowed to feel. What happened tonight doesn't define you, it's just a chapter. And when we close this chapter, we can write the next one." For the first time since the fight, the brother allowed himself to feel the weight of his emotions. The anger, the fear, the confusion, they all came rushing to the surface. But there was something else, too. A small, flickering sense of peace. "I don't know what's next," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "You don't have to," she replied softly. "One step at a time. You've done enough. We've both done enough." She was right. He had done everything he could to protect her, to make sure she was safe. And now, it was time for them to heal together. They didn't have all the answers. But they had each other, and that was enough for now. As the brother stood there, looking at his sister, he felt a small sense of calm wash over him. He hadn't just taken down the bikers. He had taken down his own demons, too. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could face whatever came next. "You're right," he said quietly, his gaze softening. "It's not over. But it's a start." And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they would be okay. Together, they could face the world and all the challenges it threw at them. The lessons of the past would stay with them, but they wouldn't let it define their future. The brother had learned something vital that night. Sometimes the hardest part of life is knowing when to stop fighting. It wasn't always about winning. Sometimes, it was about knowing when enough was enough and choosing to move forward, no matter the scars you carry. The morning after the intense night, the brother woke up to a quiet house. The weight of the previous evening still lingered, but now, with the dawn breaking through the window, he felt a strange sense of calm that had eluded him all night. The violence, the uncertainty, the fear, all of it seemed so far away in the soft light of the early morning. He sat on the edge of his sister's couch, his head resting in his hands as he reflected on everything that had happened. The bikers were gone, the threat to his sister was neutralized, and for the first time in what felt like forever, his sister was safe. Yet, the brother couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted within him. Something deep, something that went beyond the physical battle he had fought. His sister came into the room, a fresh cup of coffee in her hands, offering it to him as she sat down beside him. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently, her eyes full of understanding. He looked at her, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "I'm okay," he said, though the truth was more complicated than that. But last night, it wasn't just about getting revenge. It was about proving something, about proving I still have control over my life, that I can protect what's mine. But now, I wonder if it was the right way to go about it. She sat quietly, her gaze steady. "You're not alone in questioning yourself. We all do things we later wonder about. But what matters now is what you learned from it. And what you've learned can make you stronger." His sister's words sank in slowly. She was right. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of chaos and conflict. But it wasn't just the bikers that he had been fighting. He had been fighting his own fears, his own doubts, and in the process, he had forgotten who he was. A soldier, yes, but also a man who had to learn how to move forward, not by fighting, but by finding peace within himself. He turned to face her, meeting her eyes. "What do I do now? After everything? What comes next?" She took a deep breath, her face thoughtful. "You've done enough. It's time to heal, to rebuild. Not just for me, but for you, too. You don't need to fight to prove who you are. Sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves." Her words were like a light breaking through a storm, shedding light on the truth he had been avoiding. He had been so caught up in protecting her, in fighting those bikers, that he had forgotten the most important thing, his own peace. The battles he fought in the outside world would never end if he didn't first conquer the ones inside himself. The brother took a long breath, realizing that his path was about more than just survival. It was about healing, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally, too. For so long, he had believed that protecting others meant fighting, winning battles, being tough. But now he understood that true strength came from letting go of the anger, from forgiving himself for the choices he had made, and from choosing to heal. As the days passed, the brother and his sister slowly rebuilt their lives. The brother reached out to old friends, reconnected with parts of himself he had neglected. He enrolled in therapy, not because he was broken, but because he wanted to understand himself better, to work through the emotions he had bottled up for so long. And in time, he found that the more he focused on healing, the more he began to understand what he had been searching for all along: peace. It wasn't about fighting. It wasn't about taking revenge or proving his worth through action. It was about choosing to live with purpose, to let go of the things that had held him back, and to move forward with love, hope, and understanding. One day, as he sat with his sister in the quiet of their home, sipping coffee, he realized something he hadn't truly understood until now. He had won the battle, but the real victory wasn't in the destruction of the bikers or the revenge he had taken, it was in the way he had learned to face his fears, to trust himself, and to heal. The true strength had come not from his ability to fight, but from his ability to change, to evolve. The brother smiled at his sister, feeling the weight of the past finally lifting. They had both been through so much, but together, they had come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more aware of what truly mattered. "Thank you," he whispered, the words carrying more meaning than they ever had before. "Thank you for always being there, even when I didn't know how to be there for myself." His sister smiled back, her eyes filled with warmth. "You're not alone anymore. You never were." And as they sat together, the brother knew, deep in his heart, that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, with strength, with love, and with the peace that came from knowing that the hardest part of any battle was choosing to stop fighting. The real victory, he had learned, was in living.